The research on Norway is really cutting edge in the world, publishing papers and reports in the highest ranked journals. A lot of people working on these issues. Second, Norway is very similar to Sweden, so it's convenient to compare in a quite credible way the two countries because the labor market institutions are quite similar, I would say. So we are therefore very honored that Professor Harald Dale Olsen from the Institute of Social Research in Oslo is here to give a presentation for 30 to 35 minutes, and then there will be a discussion as usual. All in all, 75 minutes. So, having said this, Harald, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And Donald invited me. He suggested this should be the title for the speech, and I thought, what? Norway, a laboratory? And then I started looking at the work's been done on Norway the last 5 years, and there's immense numbers of it, close to 20 papers, and I probably skipped someone, so don't be offended. But this sort of begs the question, why? And then you have to step back one and look at this. And this, if you were a GP and you were to suggest to your patient whether what should you do to relax, you could choose the regular chewing gum, or you could go for some medicine. And of course, the one on the regular chewing gum is based on correlation, based on what you hear people say. Well, this benzo kind of thing will have to be tested several times with the RCTs and different kinds of things. So here, this is the reason, the search for causal effects. And all these in bold here uses the same kind of policy change. Half of the studies that's on the previous slide. So with that in mind, this is rather specific to Norway. You will probably be able to generalize, but it's context dependent in that respect. So I'm going to talk very little about Norway. My guess is that you know Norway quite well, but I'm going to describe what happened in Norway. A short detour on market power, then we go on to union wages and productivity, then talk a little bit about unequal union effects for unequal workers and unequal firms, a little bit about unions and innovation, and end up with policy recommendations and what do we need to know, because we don't know what we should know. Okay, Norway, highly coordinated. We have pattern bargaining, as you heard earlier today, too tired, someone would call it, become more decentralized the last decades, like Sweden, like Denmark. We have an aggregate union density hovering around, probably around 30 to 60%, depending on sector. Over 80% in the public sector, majority women. Employer organization, on the other hand, is increasing, over 70%. In private sector today, of course, public sector is organized. This establishment of collective agreements driven by workplace union density, the agreements, the minimum is really 10%, but in practice, according to the unions at least, they say we need 40 to 50%, and it affects people within that bargaining area. And we do have mandatory extensions. As you heard one of the questions earlier today, yes, but primarily considerable and worse. Social dumping is the key word there. And then we come to the memberships in unions and employer organizations. They are subsidized. And this is really the key thing here, because Norwegian workers, they are subsidized union membership, where since part of the union dues deductible when determining their income tax. This very strongly during the period 2000-2012, and today it's roughly 8,000 Norwegian crowns. subsidy is 28% of that amount. And this is used as an exogenous shock sort of experiment. Think about a natural experiment in the number of these Norwegian studies. And to show you, this is obviously related to politics. Does it work? Okay, anyway, I go here. The Bondevik government, that is center conservative, cut this subsidy in 1998, kept it low. This was massively opposed by the unions, naturally, and they were forced to increase it back to the original level in 2003. Then we got a new government, Labour government, Stoltenberg government, actually, and one started to increase these subsidies. Until 2012, 2013, you got Sol. It's flat. All these studies that we are to report finding from is in this period here. Around 2016, 2017, myself, Erling Barth, and Alex Bryson, UCL, started looking at this and see, oh, couldn't we analyze this, see the impact, this exogenous shock here? And we started presenting these results. Here, unions were very interested in union price elasticity because nobody had presented anything on that. And then we presented for the government, and with the new Labour government in 2021, this is what happened, skyrocketing. So this is a case where empirical results have been policy important, at least from the perspective of unions, and probably also for the economics side of this as well. Okay. This is then what basically you see here, the average union dues in the private sector, in manufacturing, trade and construction, which increased quite steadily. Here you see another graph of what these income deductions, how these went. This is how the subsidy, the 28% developed. And this is what's then the subsidy share, that is the subsidy relative to the average union dues. And this means it increased from 7% roughly to over 20% in 2012, which is a massive, or at least a strong hike in union these subsidies, what this really means. And it mattered. At the top here, the gray line, this is what you saw during this period among non-Western immigrants that observed. But if you look at this dotted line, declining here, this is what you would get if you had kept it to 2000. You look at different groups here, like the Western, particularly non-Western immigrants. So it did matter. It did matter differently. Okay. And when you're using such an experiment to analyze the impact in the labor market, you have to remember that you are really studying the impact of the compliers, those that are union members regardless. And we see in this case, just simple men versus women response, it's stronger for women. Native versus Western immigrants, stronger for Western immigrants than natives. Non-Western immigrants, stronger than for natives. Old versus young versus old, stronger for young. And you see very, very different pattern depending on whether you are young, whether you are low-wage, high-wage worker, plant-aged, young versus old, physical strain, low versus high. And whether you are a high productivity firm versus a low productivity firm. So this shows how different kinds of workers react to this experiment. And this is what drives this results that you will see in Norwegian studies. Okay, we heard earlier today Manning talking about monopsony, market power, imperfect markets. And this has been known for several hundred years. at least. This market power usually entails a welfare loss. The too high prices, too low consumptions, too high wages, too low employment. So market power is generally bad, usually, but it might offset it all. And the market power in the labor market, that's unions, that's employers. Both these act in a way that might be considered negative in one way, but as I will argue later, they might also offset each other. And when I did this first coining of US monopsony, like you heard in Manning's speech, that's Robinson in 1933. When I did my PhD late in the 1990s, early 2000, Manning's book was All the Days, Monopsony and Motion, 2003. It came up, and it also inspired by the works of Kent Burrett and Dale Mortensen. Now, things go around circles. It's not like you heard that suddenly we all lost theory and it's only empirics. This is sort of things coming around 20 years. Then you have new papers on monopsony, and which are published. Some of these are meta-studies, survey, reviews of several studies. And you have a special issue in Journal of Human Resources. It's one of the better economic journals. So all these recognize that you don't have this cold town where everybody works for the same employer. You have frictions in the labor market that induces monopsony power for employers. And of course, these market powers, this monopsony thing, these are very often you talk about observing or estimating the elasticity of labor supply facing each establishment or each worker. That means you do some sort of a turnover kind of thing. It could be identifying by looking at the concentration, where in very limited industries, you see how the number of players in that industry change, and it changes. You could see it potentially through minimum wages. You could look at prices and markups. There's a researcher called Sabine Doblar who the three measures are sort of implicit or potential monopsony power, while prices and markups reveal the true monopsony power, if you say. But that again, it rests on certain assumptions. You know, however, is that market, I mean, know it for 30 years actually, that market power. And by that, if you think about Tesla, think about Volvo, or huge players in the market, it's clear that they have market power in the factor markets, buying bits, nuts and bolts, that sort of things. And they have market power in the consumption, the product market as well. So these studies here all sort of identify this relationship between market power in different kind of markets. And some of this is from Norway, for instance, and I'll come back to that. And in this case, then you will see in Manning's Monopsony in Motion book, you clearly have an indication that union pay setting, that it can also be affected by whether that employer, that specific employer, have market power in the product market. So it sort of depends through the wage setting, what kind of level the union wage demands they are on. So in some respect, from the standard monopsonistic theory, if you increase the wages, you increase the labor supply. Then union pushing the wages upwards is good. However, if the employer has product market power, he might then respond by reducing his labor demand. So it might actually be a bad thing. So this makes it extremely difficult. This is I think they got a resubmit in QGE, so it's a very nice paper and difficult paper. Okay, What about monopsony in Scandinavia? Turnover, as I said, my thesis was on monopsony and turnover. So we have a lot of studies from early 2000. You have a very, very nice study by Folk using a natural experiment on teachers in Norway. Concentration, yes, you heard Thoresen's work was referred earlier today. And Dodini in Norway looked at concentration, published in Quarterly Journal. Economic Journal last year. When it comes to minimum wages, that's not so easy. First of all, minimum wage is not common in Scandinavia, but this Kreiner study is at least from Denmark, looking at young workers' labor supply. But it's no clear evidence that there's monopsony there. And if you look at prices and markups and that stuff, then you also find evidence of monopsony in Scandinavia, in Norway, that is. And as I said, market power, this is related across market. The Norwegian studies have a much more positive view than causal studies from the US. And you have to remember, if you are to look at US, long way, but the reason why you can draw causal evidence from the US is that they have something that's called the Wagner Act that makes union get a trade union agreement, get power when they got 50.1%. If they got the majority, then the whole shop is affected. If they got if there's only 39.99999, no trade union agreement. With 90% union density versus 10% union density, and those is 49.999. Very, very similar, except that you have a trade union agreement with above 50%, and that makes it possible to derive causal evidence. However, they find nothing. If you increase union density by 1% point, you get 1 to 1% increase in wages. And that means multiply that by, let's say, 0.7, 0.9, you get an increase in wage cost. That means the revenue for the employer increases much more than the wage cost. Keep that in mind. Dodini and the co-authors done the same thing. They don't focus on productivity, and then they can analyze the whole economy. And then they find the wage impact here is roughly 1.9 across the whole economy. So why do we see this? We argue when in manufacturing, we were able to utilize other data sources, and we see that this is basically, it happens when you get union density across, let's say 10%, but the main impact for these manufacturing firm occurs when you passes 45-50%, and we see the establishment of more formalized routines of communication, that you have these sort of we call local consultative committees. But what I want you to think about is that this increase in union density here is sort of driving the firm to behave, structure themselves in a sensible way. You heard the word earlier today that Attila used the word cluttered, and this is sort of one of the positive benefits that comes from this increased union density. You should also be aware of one of the studies that's been published here is that they actually find negative impact of the increased union density, where you don't have trade union agreements. The big problem there is, of course, that they are forced to take trade union agreement as given. But of course, this is really a function of union density. So there's slightly difficult there. But where you have a trade union agreement, then they have positive impacts as well. Okay, everybody is sort of agreed that unions are good for weak workers in Norway during this period. So they are able to raise the wages of those lowest paid. They are more successful in raising the wages of immigrants, the natives, within a job. Although there's a slight negative twist here, but because you don't find it within a worker, that means that when you don't take into account where immigrants' native works, then you might have a negative result here. That means there are selection issues. This sort of unions might affect this selection pattern here. If the market is competitive, then it's the white-collar workers that receive the wage premium. However, the blue-collar workers receives the premium the more market concentration increases. This sort of hints that union power, market firm monopoly power is related. So to say in other words, these unions, they contribute to wage inequality, competitive markets, but reduce wage equality in markets characterized by monopolistic employers. And these are the one, of course, where you find at the lower end of the wage distribution. So it goes hand in hand with the previous slide. You heard earlier today that there was certain talk about non-wage amenities. That means unions don't do bargaining for wages only. Unions do a lot of things. And a job comprises not only the wage. There's a lot of things that this a job entails. Think about it as a job bundle. And a nice word for that is non-wage amenities. You can think about it as job protection. Unions provide that. Promotion facilitation, work environment, public transfers. They might not directly determine, but they might their work influence who gets it and who gets not. And of course, they influence upskilling and training. And Dodini and others have shown that this increased union density implies less need for unemployment benefits, less public transfer, but more higher sick pay. That's faulty. Sorry, it should say higher sick pay. And that's the reason why you get higher sick pay in Norway is that you have 100% compensation. So if the wage goes up, so goes the sick pay. However, nobody looked at the absence rate, sickness absence rate, whether this is causally impacting the sickness absence rate. What they do see is that the longer run use of the social security system is reduced for all ages. So in this study by Dodinia and others, they drew a back of the envelope calculation, and there's massive gains from this unionization process here. You should be aware of Mastercosa from 2013, which had a rather, at least from the union perspective, nasty results, because he showed that when workers joined the union, they become more absent. And when they left the union, they started to show up at work. So it's it might be some selection kind of thing going on in this Mastercosa. And I would love to look at that in the future, by the way. So yes, and what Kostal showed is that as union density grows, so do the propensity to participate. Firm do response to unions. On average, in the private sector, the unions sort of pushes employers away from the optimal relative demand for routine workers, and thus Kostal and Svarstad argue that this sort of decelerate technological development. On the other hand, in manufacturing, which Erling and I and Alex analyzed, they find that it accelerates technological development. So there is some important heterogeneity with respect to industries. Mm-hmm. And Dodini and it shows that unionization appears to increase the markup in export industries. Think about that. What does that mean? You heard me saying that unionization increased productivity, increased wages. They argue that also increased the markups. That means that part of the productivity effect that I was talking about could be related to a price response. That these wage increases that the union pushes up is sort of put over to the price and then paid by people abroad. On the other hand, when I come to the innovation bit, you will see that unions have a tendency to promote product innovation. So part of this markup increase, of course, I can't say that it's not price increase, but it could equally well be a quality increase. So they can't really disentangle the quality from the price effect here. Yes, innovation. This is a dismal story in that respect that there's only one causal study, and that is a US study, and that tells the story that basically you get a reduction in patent quality and quantity because firms relocate to other states where unions have no influence. Okay, that's not really what I would like to talk about, but that's the only causal study. All these others have been done a lot of studies, and they are all correlations. And if you go to Anglo-Saxon countries, you find a negative correlation. If you go to the European countries, you find 0 or positive correlations. You see it in Italy, and it's very often you see a positive correlation between product innovation and unions. And think about it. Why is it so much? Why could it be more beneficial for unions that you have product innovation instead of process innovation? That's clearly because unions are slightly reluctant to have labor-saving technology introduced. It's much easier to promote product innovation because that doesn't affect this production structure and labor demand. So what Alex Bryson and myself saw a couple of years ago, also correlations, indicate that local bargaining stimulate product and process innovation, or just product innovation. We had a shock, COVID-19 shock, a couple of years ago. Remember that? Those were high unions, we had a trade union agreement by introducing new technology, and they were less likely to postpone. That indicates that unions are pro-change, so they're not always negative. I think you should be aware of that you need to have that the trade union agreement isn't the sole thing, because you need to have cooperation and respect and all that kind of thing together to make the firm less cluttered than what it is. Unions are important for skill upgrading, but mostly for vocational tertiary education. And I think the green transition and AI revolution sort of demand a refocus here. And one should be aware of that yes, unions contribute to ameliorate worry and stress when new labor-saving technology is introduced, but that isn't their prerogative. And awareness of this is important. And I think they need to acknowledge they should contribute to rewarding and challenging work environment for all workers, not the least favorable only. So, and that is to avoid divide and conquer. So what don't we know? We don't know whether and how the unions are promoting creative destruction. Research and union heavily man-centric. Can we generalize from manufacturing? I'm not sure. What about public sector? 30-35% of in Scandinavian countries, public sector constitutes 30-35%, and no research on public. Nobody do anything about public sector in this case. Yes, they compress wage differential unions, distorting the signal given by wages, but close to nobody has studied the mobility effect, how these worker flows go between firms. And of course, unions are not unions. That seems a stupid sentence, but they have conflicting interests. And how does it play out in the labor market? Prime example, you have 150,000 Norwegian government employees, which have 4 different unions. Very, very different strategies how to handle wages and bargaining and that sort of thing. And there's a massive demand for demand studies from other places, other times. And with respect to union and technology and innovation, there's only one, as I said. So.
Thank you. Mark, can you stand over there? Thanks. Okay. Where do we start with all this? I think one question I think is important in Sweden, I think in Norway also, as you mentioned, is what is the collective agreement? What is the trade union? What is the local work in the firm place? How can you disentangle? Possible?
It should be possible if you had good data in the trade union agreement. But what you really need to know what types of workers are within a specific trade union agreement, and you need to know the number of workers within that bargaining area. Then you might derive some analysis design around this threshold. But whenever the people I know looked at that issue, and they think they see they have a story. It might be published, it might be not.
Okay.
In my case, I've been looking at that for 10-15 years, trying to disentangle it, but it becomes very...
Okay.
So,
you said in the beginning that the trade unions have been interested in this, but are they taking part in delivering data, supporting absolute knowledge, or?
No, all our data are coming from Statistics Norway. We do have had access through FAFO, collaborating research institutes that have better connections with both the government and probably with the unions. So within the state, the sector, we have been able to looking at treaty areas, but otherwise in the bog standard Norwegian administrative register, you only see union membership, and you don't see what trade union agreement he or she belongs to. But that's so you have to derive some sort of looking at occupation and think, okay, he is a metal worker, then he might be a member of the metal worker union, that sort of thing.
Okay, but can you somehow disentangle the pattern bargaining in firms which have this wage norm and other firms that might not?
That we can, because if you can compare to firms that do not have trade union agreements at all, and that, of course, they might follow the pattern bargaining, but they don't have to.
Okay.
So you can do some comparison, and in some cases you can rest on surveys that say, do you only have individual wage bargaining? Some firms actually argue that they only have that. So, but it's very hard to say that, oh, this firm A, which doesn't have any kind of trade union agreement, doesn't have only have individual wage bargaining isn't influenced by what is happening in in the key manufacturing industries.
No.
Clearly, they are living in the same environment, and they are fighting for the same, in many cases, the same workers. So there's, why pay more if you don't have to?
Why is it then that the focus here is on the manufacturing sector, and you say that the public sector is not clear cut?
No, we know very well who works in the public sector, and there's no problem doing stuff on wages. But can anyone here tell me the productivity of a public servant?
True.
There's no measure on productivity. That's why we are did the stuff on manufacturing, because there you can derive total factor productivity and do productivity analysis. So
but in the private service sector,
there's mixed.
Yeah.
They do have in some, but it's limited to larger workplaces. They're not everybody that has to deliver this to accounting registers and that so on. So, but it's that's rather tedious. But this database has been growing. So if you go 20 years ago, then fewer sectors were included.
Yeah.
So this is a data-driven answer, really.
Okay. Then what are the peaks of this research? When you go to conferences or politicians in Norway and other places, what do they?
When I started presenting this reform, they didn't believe the effect that it should. Why should it affect anyone at all? That whether you got 200, 300, 400 crowns more or less in with respect to the union price, but it's effect. So I think the issue is really what is happening, who is driving these results when you see these, for instance, these productivity effects, and we try to answer that, but it's very hard to know what goes on within a firm. Attila Lindner quote, as I said, he talked about making these American firms less cluttered. What is less cluttered?
Yeah.
I can't really tell that. Then a personal economics guy could probably do that, because they are more into the nitty-gritty bits within the firm.
Okay, last question then. What about the policy interest among politicians in Norway about this research? Can you see it somewhere, or?
With respect to the second stage, the impact on productivity, the impact on wages, the impact on utilization of benefits, not that much, but there's been quite interest, as I said, in 2017-18 on whether these tax deduction worked for increasing or bolstering unionization in Norway. And of course unions were interested in that as well.
Thanks. Then we invite the panel up, please. Jon Erik Dölvik, Erik Sjölander, Lars Andersen och Anders Forslund. Jon Erik, you're a professor emeritus at FAFO.
Yes.
A research institute in Oslo, formerly close to the labor unions, but not that much, but still you are affiliated, or?
Yes, I'm formally retired, but since we are in private sector, I can still work a bit. So I'm kind of part-time retired, partly being at work.
Okay. And Erika, 5 unions within the Swedish industry, what is that?
It's a cooperation of the trade unions within Swedish industry that also have signed the framework for the wage bargaining in Sweden, the industrial agreement. So that's a cooperation that soon has 30 years. And well, in short, that's it.
Yeah, in short. Lars, you're from AE.
Yeah.
What do you say that in Danish? What is that?
I can try to say it in Danish. It's Arbejderbevægelsens Erhvervsråd, but I'd like to tell you what our English name is. It's Economic Council of the Labor Movement. So I think it's we're more like a arena and agenda in Norway. I think perhaps a bit farful too.
Anders, you're also emeritus, but you're still working on research at IFAU.
Yes, definitely.
And what is
although I'm a public employee, actually, I'm still working.
Still working. Very good. Okay. What are your first general thoughts, briefly, about what Harald just have said? And I start with Lars.
Yes, I think it's extremely important. In fact, I think 2 years ago we made a Danish report in English, unions increase equality and wealth, and it was we heavily used the research from Norway because, as you said, Daniel, in your beginning, it's the best research we have at all in the world. It's causal. This issue are causal, it's correlation. So it and we used it, and the trade unions were very happy with it.
Okay, I continue. Your first thoughts?
Well, it's really interesting that to sort of use this findings, this new data, and you sort of can answer questions that, for me, as I work within the trade unions on a daily basis, for me it's sort of evident that what your the results that you get, how it is. But it's really interesting now that you can also show it in economic research. So that's well, first comment.
Thanks.
No.
Erik?
I have exactly the same reaction. I mean, having worked 30, 40 years with the Nordic trade unions and argued for the benefits of the way we have institutionally organized our labor markets, far from a perfect competitive labor market, but organized. I mean, it's a relief to get confirmed that all we have argued seems to be true. So thanks to this very, very sneaky way of detecting the causes and being able to measure consequences of unionization. So I think it's great research.
Not only politically, but also analytically.
Yes. It's formidable. And I think it feeds into a broader rediscovery of the importance of all organized labor markets, all collective bargaining. If you look at what OECD writes now with their collective bargaining report compared to what they wrote in the 90s, which when it was all about deregulation and decentralization and so on and so forth, they have recognized the importance of these actors.
Yes.
And I think the research Harald and his fellows have done bolsters that tendency internationally.
Anders, your thoughts?
Well, first, I'm kind of jealous of the data. One important reason that we haven't done this kind of research in Sweden is that we have no data on union membership, which of course makes it impossible to study the consequences of union membership in any dimension at all. We have kind of a similar experiment, although we kind of took away the subsidies overnight, which could be used for a study if we had access to membership data, but we don't. Then I'm not sure that we would find as much results for Sweden as we did for Norway, because I'm kind of convinced by the arguments made in some of the papers that it might be due to the fact of a kind of special arrangement in Norway where you have to have large membership locally in order to get a collective agreement. And I think the key to things may be the existence of a collective agreement. And in Sweden, we have collective agreements in most workplaces. And so I'm not sure that's there what I would look for it first. I would be more concerned about finding results. I would be more interested in finding results on how to stimulate union membership in order to prevent the Swedish model of collective agreements.
Oh, okay. Thanks. Okay, some comments from that, Harald?
I think the last point here is it's important. It is the local embeddedness within the firm that makes these productivity enhancing effects credible to say that, because this sort of aligns the version 2 when there's level. So yes, that particularly to the last one. The other ones that didn't come, the criticisms. I can't really. Thank you.
Just a comment on that. Is you have data on if you have a local club or not. So that could be a way to disentangle even further, I guess. Okay,
but might I add another thing?
Yeah.
As I said in this talk, I'm not convinced that you will see enhanced productivity enhancing effects if you are looking at firms already on the threshold.
Yes.
Because for certain industries, they are extremely low productive firms that you can't really reorganize the workforce in any sensible way. Yeah.
But if you have a discontinuity, you can see if you don't have a local club and then you get a club, what happens after five years or something?
Yeah.
Maybe. But okay, Jon Erik, what are you doing at FAFO on these issues? Are you working with similar topics or?
Yeah, some of the younger colleagues were cited here. 3-4 of these younger colleagues have been with us and moved on to some of these other cutting-edge research groups that have been driving this work. So yes, we are in a way linked to it, but we're definitely not in the forefront.
Okay.
But as you may know, different from the Swedish FIF, which were once the trade union research institute in Sweden, and we had some contact with them. They were economists. We are mostly social scientists of different brands, and not that many economists, but we have a few. But I'd like to reflect a little bit upon why have we got these driving environment of labor market economists. Of course, it's the special data access. That's kind of a gold mine. But different from Sweden, it seems to me that we have more independent research units who have had access to funding from the ministry and from the research council, where labor market issues have been the priority number one. Mm-hmm. While in academic research in the universities and so on, perhaps labor market studies haven't ranked that high. So we have several institutes like Harald's, the Frisch Center, working together with economists in the university. So there is an environment for driving this kind of labor market econometric research.
Okay.
I think it's institutionally how research are set up.
Well,
we tried to recruit some of the economists by FAFO, and we didn't succeed. So there's a nice environment for FAFO.
It's a good with a high demand for labor.
Yeah, but he's pointing at something important. First of all, to get published in good journals, you need to have some sort of a lever, and these reform provided a lever. When you start working, and then you start working on this, utilizing this reform, and then you see there's a lot of other interesting things going on with respect to unions. So it's sort of flower. It's you spin off other projects as well, and then you get funding from Research Council if you can pitch it in sufficiently high quality way. So there's a combination of something that happened and people who saw that, oh, these can be utilized, and what brings with it. Yeah.
Lars, can you continue to lean on Norway and research? What should you do by yourself?
Yeah, unfortunately, we can't do much ourselves. We also have some registered data, but I don't think we have enough, and it's difficult to make this natural experiment of changing tax subsidies. And I would say in Denmark, compared to Norway, in labor market research, we don't have that much in Denmark. You have to get a research environment, and things will grow out of that. We miss that in Denmark.
Wouldn't that be a good investment for the trade union movement to have
yes,
that?
try to convince them.
What do they say?
Yes, I think it would be a very good idea, but when I come to trade unions and others to ask for money for such research, they will say, perhaps next year. So it's difficult because we don't have that tradition.
Yeah.
If you look at the Copenhagen universities, there is some research on labor market, but it's more sociological. It's not so much economic research.
Erika, when you look around in Sweden, what do you see in terms of data analysis and so forth?
Well, as Anders already pointed out, there is not an easy way for researchers to get to the, if you want to investigate or do research on labor membership, it's not accessible. So that's maybe one problem, but of course you can do research also without that, but it doesn't make it as well. It's similar to what Lars is describing in Denmark. It's not so easy to do that if you don't have that special that they have had in Norway. So yeah, but of course, like this initiative that we have now, this productivity commission that you are heading, it's sort of one way at least to try to promote and discuss and get these types of research known at least. Then of course next step would be also to do it also in some type of form in Sweden.
Anders, is it only a matter of data availability? I mean, IFA, you had a lot of people, you had Institute for Labor Studies and a lot of researchers. Can you not come up with anything in these areas, or?
We actually got a commission by the government in 2012, I think, to study wage setting for people with a loose connection to the labor market, and we defined that as we looked at youngsters being hired for the first time. We had long conversations with people at Svenskt Näringsliv, and we got access to a lot of collective agreements for a number of years, and we tried to match collective agreements to actual persons in our registers. By basically using the industry codes and occupation codes. And then we can look at aggregates and see if they match, and we found good matches. So we managed actually to look at some kind of consequences of the central agreements for stuff like wages or like employment. But we had to make a lot of guesses, and we didn't get the data that would have been needed to do a real good job, actually.
Okay.
We did a good job in some respects, I think, but the lack of data is the main problem, not the lack of interest.
Okay. Harald.
I seem to remember a paper by Alexander Wilén looking at the decentralized from a sort of a centralized kind of thing to individual. Like economics, a very nice journal, and he found nothing except that you that is geographically local wages. So, there's some. My guess is that one could look towards more decentralized wages in both Sweden and Denmark. I think that you do have it. From 2014, we looked at the decentralized probabilist in Revstat. Very nice.
Jon Erik.
Yeah. At the same time as I've been praising this research, I'm a little bit puzzled when you emphasize so strongly that this was findings from manufacturing, because I would think the effects of increasing trade union membership a little bit, as this was, could have been strong in some private service sectors where unionization is low and you might get new collective agreements and so on and so forth. But in manufacturing, there is already from the outset a very high collective bargaining coverage. So as this is this is the stronghold of the Norwegian trade union movement. So have you any reflections upon how this effect of this increasing individual membership has brought about all these positive effects? Because I would immediately think, yes, it's due to the collective agreement, the local partnership, the voice role.
That was my point when I said that you see this not only following the establishment of a trade union agreement. Some of these firms didn't have a trade union agreement.
They didn't, no.
But it wasn't restricted to that. It seemed joint with the establishment of joint consultative committees and all these other kind of bureaucratic kind of thing.
Representation.
Representation rules.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Of course, that you don't see in the bog standard administrative data. Then you had to look at, we used the workplace and enterprise survey, ABU, basically, which let us identify this. But personally, I think when you get a certain level of unionization, you sort of get the whole package, and the whole package is beneficiary. So it isn't that easy to say, oh, it's just joint consultative comment. Oh, it's just the trade union agreement. That's the whole thing that is.
That's what we call lokale partsforhold.
Yeah, you might call it that. Yeah, the whole kind of thing. Yeah, and that's why I plugged in the sentence respect as well, because if the employer doesn't,
I just want to take a half step back to Anders. Do you agree on this change among OECD and in the labor economics research agenda on leaving the perfect competition model and try to be more realistic or real world oriented?
I think definitely if you look at OECD recommendations, they've changed over time.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that the research environment in Uppsala has changed to the same extent, because we looked at data even in the 80s.
Yeah. Okay. If you have any questions, think about it, and then we can have the mic. But before that, I wonder, what are the views from the employers? You there that meet the employers, do they agree on this, or what are their positions?
I can. 2-3 years ago, I made a study for the Nordic Council of Ministers about the Nordic working life model, and had a lot of discussions with the Norwegian employers. It turned out that Norway was so much lower on collective bargaining coverage than the other countries, and what could we do about it? And then the employer representative said, we also want to have a hard job convincing many of our members about the benefits, because there are costs related. Occupational pension scheme, which costs things, and so on and so forth. But so they say that there is a local inertia where small companies especially are reluctant to sign up to all this. So the employers in principle are all in favor, but well, how much are they willing to do with it? Because they say then the unions have to do their job, and they can say, we are friendly, I hope you good luck, and but to me it seems they are positive. But the main problem is not in manufacturing. The main problem is in private services. And when the collective bargaining coverage in Norway in private sector is 47%, and it's slowly declining, it's mostly due to private services. And that's nothing new. That's been like that for many decades. What is new is that you have got a much greater supply of people who are willing to work for low pay, so you have got a low pay labor market, and then it certainly matters. But the employers in private services, it's called Virke, they have a 40%, only 40% collective bargaining coverage among their members. And they say, we try to inspire them to sign agreements, but they're not really interested.
But do they have extended agreements then, or?
No, some of them in hotel and restaurants now they have, but then the minimum pay rate in the extended collective agreement have been the wage floor, so they say we don't need anymore. So that has been an example that you create the floor and that becomes the norm. So the incentive to sign in for more is perhaps weakened. So there is an ambiguity between extension and raising collective bargaining, real collective bargaining coverage. It's a helping device to keep up the wage floor, but at the same time, it may create an incentive for employers for not signing into collective bargaining.
Yeah. From Denmark, Lars, what is your
I think
point of
it's
view?
much the same as what we just heard. Of course, the employers' organizations, they are very for general agreements. We have the problems with the private service sector, and of course, we have problems with small companies. But I think the coverage in Denmark is for general agreement is about, I think, 80%, and the union density is something like 50 or 60%. So you can see the problem for the trade unions is that in some companies, are you the representative? If you have a collective agreement, or you only have under half of the employees who are members of unions, that's a problem in some of the companies.
But let's say if we think 25 years ahead, would it be possible not to think that we would have more extended agreements due to the union density going down and so forth in the private service sector? Is there any other way to go, or?
No, it's difficult to see other ways. But of course, the reason why they are not using the Norwegian model is that it's some kind of saying we have failed. So long that you have enough members, enough collective agreement. At some point, because you lose members, at some point you need to do it.
Yeah.
I don't hope so.
Might I just have a question actually?
Okay.
How is demand for unionization among young people in Scandinavia, Sweden, Denmark?
If you take Denmark, I think for the skilled workers, when they just finished their education, members.
So it isn't a cohort effect, that is sort of the unionization is losing its...
Yeah.
Same in Sweden, I think.
Same, yeah. I would say yes. Erika, we know about Sweden, the industrial agreement, but you have a very close cooperation within the manufacturing sector with employers. Do you see they as promoting trade unionism due to productivity effects, voice effects, like supporting the firms?
I wouldn't say that they would use this research to promote, but they see, of course, positive effects of the model, the agreement that we have, so they are supporting it. And so for, as many of you have for the manufacturing sector, the problem maybe is not so big, but there are also parts of the Swedish labor market where this union density is a bigger issue. And also there are sometimes you hear from employers, organizations, that they want to maybe opt out and have kind of collective agreement light, or what can we do just to, and I think that maybe they say that is one way to get more of the companies to join, but on the other hand, there's also one way to erode the model. So we have to be aware, I think, of those tendencies.
Yes, thanks. Any questions? Här har vi en fråga.
Thank you. Per Molander, former chairman of the Public Commission on Equality. What was striking in Harald's survey of the literature was the difference between European and American studies. Basically, unionization is good in European studies and zero or negative in the American scene. Now, there may be two different explanations for this fact.
I can provide one.
The first is that the economists are biased, and that
they are biased as well. But that's not the key reason.
Yeah, well, I mean, the forecast would be that the American economists tend to be more right-leaning, and we know from research that the personal bias of social scientists influence the results they get. The second explanation, there is a difference in substance. That there's really a difference in climate in labor markets in Europe, Nordic countries in particular, and the US scene. So that there is sort of a virtuous circle in unionization and cooperation in the European, in particular Nordic labor markets, and that the US system is stuck in an equilibrium where society is basically seen as a zero-sum game with little room for cooperation. Which explanation would you favor?
The second explanation is completely true. Unions in Europe, unions in US behave very different. So that's for sure. That's one of the reasons. The other reason is actually when we're doing these causal studies in US, as I said, you compare, let's say, those with union density of 49 against those with union density of 51. That means you compare it where the unions are weakest. Between these to disentangle, to get any causal effects at all. But it's still high-paying workers to leave these firms. You have a trade union agreement. So if you think that the most highly paid workers are the most valuable one, the most productive one, then they are sort of leaving the ship. But for those that remain, they don't. You go. The same you see with respect to innovations, that firms relocate to avoid the unions. So right, there's a different climate. they behave differently.
The time is running out. I just want to, do you have any final comments from the panelists there, the 5 of you? Anders, do you have anything to finish with?
One thing that hasn't been up to discussion here is the fact that the wage policies pursued by Nordic trade unions basically is something that, at least to some extent, has been focused on low wages, raising them, and perhaps creating a kind of level playground for everyone, meaning that we might expect those policies to have led to creative destruction, basically, weeding out low productive firms and making it possible to transfer guys from those firms to more productive firms. And that might also be part of the story.
Yeah.
But that's has more to do with the policies pursued by the unions than union membership per se.
Yeah, thanks. Jon Erik, final remark?
No, I think this is an ongoing discussion, but I can refer one point that we have discussed in Norway connected to this report about declining collective bargaining coverage and the problem of getting companies on board. And that was to take inspiration from the tax deduction for trade union membership and say, why do we only value individual action in the labor market, individual membership? Why don't we also value companies and local workers who actually generate a collective agreement?
Yeah. Okay.
Think of, for example, giving a 1% lower arbeidsgiveravgift, a deduction to those companies to make an incentive also for employers to get into the collective agreement. That was actually received with some interest from all the social partners, but it fell down in the processes, I think, into the Ministry of Finance.
Thanks.
They don't like meddling with the tax system.
I like the idea of thinking that the social partners are a positive external effect for the society. So that could be an economic argument for it.
Exactly. That was the argument.
Yeah.
That they all want collective agreements. Well,
Yeah.
why not provide some facilitations?
Sure. Erika, final word?
I don't know, just a comment to that. That would be maybe something that we could hope for in the future, maybe with another government, that they would also promote this membership, because we don't have any deductions for either part right now.
No.
So on the other hand, the trade unions themselves has to prioritize to get new members. It doesn't really depend. We shouldn't be dependent if we have a subsidy or not.
No.
So that's really the key issue for the trade unions. Have more members and sign more collective agreements.
Right. Lars?
Yes, just one comment from a broader perspective, because you could say strong unions as we have in the Norwegian countries, they also affect the policy, the more general policy. If you look around, we can see social democratic party disappear. I see that in the Nordic countries. Of course, they can go down, but they can't. And I think that is because we have strong trade unions. So it's not only these causal studies on productivity, but also what are the effects on the society? What do we invest in? What about equality? What about wealth policy?
But the union density is higher in Sweden among the white collars now than the blue collars, and the white collars are not connected to any party. So, Harald, the final word.
I think I want to creative destruction that bad. Do we really want however a lot of low productive firms paying close to zero wages? No. Then we need to have somebody upskilling these workers. That's my closing.
Thank you.